That was very good. Next, we have a special treat here. I mentioned earlier that under political status and after the hunger strike ended, the prisoners could have educational activities. They learned political science, they learned the history of Ireland, they learned the history of rebellion and revolution, and many times they learned it in the Irish language. First of all, the guards couldn't understand the Irish language, and second of all, it was part of a long tradition in the Republican movement to go back to the roots of Ireland and to learn the Irish language. And today, in the 6 counties, more and more people are speaking Irish, and many of the people who are leading that effort are former prisoners who got their first taste of Irish in the prison. We're going to hear a poem now, and Sheila Hogg is going to read it to us in Irish as it was written. In your program, there's a translation, and I'd just like to mention about Sheila too, that if anyone wants to follow in, this is Owen McCormick's footsteps. She's teaching Irish language classes Wednesday nights at the Cáisc Club. So anybody can talk to Sheila afterwards and start practicing.
Gormachag the Hamish. Ballo Yori. So Dawn le Owen Gino McCormick. Cáisc. Ní déag ocht dó. Mach madin dairimut. Chorí na Kilíní, agus Jeffrey chun na chlós. I glósanna, I cealla, I néhan eile an wadin sin. Bhí ar leithití de hí, chuidig siúl, chuidig na seasaf, agus inar dípal ag feire, chovedóri. Ag an spricán chola mé an scep. Wigi isteach, Paráid, éire, agus an achar chós bhí fuaméilear. Torrin 5 chéad bród a búla go trom an talamh. Agus hawla mé gur chola mé iad go léir. Le bród agus le bród le listan an uachra. Im líana don chéad úr bhí ar garde. Ribert, agus Princess, Raymond, Patsy, Joseph, Martin, Caoimhín, Kieran, Tomás, agus Mickey. Hifna mé an sin sa chlósin, I gúnas na ceise fada, Máidin Casca 8 dó. Hifna mé ar Cáisc, Galvin river, mar a hasmuid agus an dechnúr faoi bhlás, chúl deirse Kilíní drúta. Gan éirí inar bhalang I glití, a gód, cé a chréid an lásin go gailfí dechnúr aglaigh. Céilechán, géileh carta, rá I bhád éan ní smú, ná éadach a baint nó, agus bhábhlíon a rá cé a chréide, mar bháin an dechnúr an cá, an tost bhanóméid, paráid, scapahí, agus fabóméide, chola mé ríis. Clab 5 céad tos, nach a bóla go bob ar an orla.
Okay, that was brilliant. Again, the man who wrote that poem was a blanket prisoner. He wrote a book that is available. I just finished reading it, called On the Blanket, the A to Z of Prison Resistance. If anyone's interested in getting a copy, you can talk to myself or Tricia, and we can try to make those arrangements. It's a powerful daily analysis of what it was like to be on in the prison at Long Kesh. All right, next, our final speaker is going to be Martin Galvin. Martin is from New York City, as you'll know as soon as he starts talking. Probably a Yankee or a Mets fan. He's a former director of Publicity for Irish Northern Aid in the United States, and currently he is the chairman of the Ancient Order of Hibernians Freedom for All Ireland Committee. Here is Martin.
It's a Met and a Jet fan, Aaron Rodgers, Super Bowl. Is there Patriot fans here? Carter, as I walked around today and saw your beautiful memorial, listened to the speaker from the hunger strike, the famine fund, couldn't help but think that this injustice, the death of the hunger strikers, the injustice, the suffering, that calamity that produced it, just like so many other injustices in Ireland, began somewhere in England with some kind of British think tank coming together with some great plan on what's best for Ireland. And all the time, when they think of what's best for Ireland, they always think what's best for British interests in terms of using Ireland to get them. That was certainly true when they had the Great Hunger. You see that on the monument, when they decided, we won't do what we did in the past. We won't simply stop exports for a year. We'll just keep all the food that the Irish made and we'll export it and sell it to pay the rent for those poor landlords who shouldn't be oppressed, no matter how many people die. That was the plan. That's how it happened. That's what that memorial represents. You see the 1916 memorial. Remember, Parnell and others, for decades, the Irish just asked for a home rule parliament, a parliament to make their own decisions in Dublin under British rule, and could never have it. It was turned away. Up till the First World War, they said it were going to get it. It was passed again, and then they decided you make it at the end of the war. And oh, by the way, we'll give you two. We'll cut off a great part of the country, the industrial Northwest. It's the same thing true with Brexit. It's the same thing true right now. They're trying to do away with all the murders and killings and collusion they got away with, and covered up for so many years. And now that the Irish people are breaking through, they say, well, let's pass an amnesty law and do away with all of that so we don't have to be troubled by these things again. Those are how those injustices start. That's how the suffering start. And the hunger strike of 1981 was a classic example. Somebody somewhere sat and said that we need to do something about the prisoners which have special category status, which are treated like political prisoners. These prisoners, for the IRA or INLA, who have fought against British rule, who want to achieve the freedom of their country, who believe they're fighting for the same thing that the men and women of 1916 proclaimed and signed a proclamation, as so many other generations of Irish people have proclaimed. And what the British said was, and part of it had to do in the United States, was told this by Congressman Biaggi and others in the ad hoc committee. Every time they tried to say that there's no struggle for freedom in Ireland, there's no real battle to make that republic a republic for 32 counties, to make the republic that was declared in 1916 a reality for all Irish men and women. Every time the British would say there's just a lot of criminals, and somehow they're not like real criminals, because they're not trying to make a profit off this like real criminals, but there's just criminals, and that's what we have to do away with. And what they decided to do, whenever they said that, Biaggi, other congressmen, other people across Ireland would say, if you have no criminals, why is it that you have hundreds and thousands of political prisoners in a small country that you have in Ireland? And they couldn't refute it. So one day they decided, they got together, they had a policy. And they said, we'll do away with all of this. We'll do away with special category status. And we'll dress those prisoners, those men and women who signed on to fight for the freedom of their country, who were part of the struggle of 1916 and of so many other generations. We'll dress them up in criminal uniforms, and we'll take pictures, and we'll send it around, and we'll tell everyone that now these people are regular, ordinary criminals, and here's their pictures, and here's their propaganda, and we'll go and tell that in the United States, we'll go and tell that around Ireland, and they thought that that was a great idea. And it never occurred to them that prisoners who wanted to fight for Irish freedom were not going to betray their struggle. that they were not going to let their pictures be taken. It used in propaganda to undermine their struggle, to divide them from their communities, to tell a lie about what their struggle was all about. And as has been mentioned, Kieran Nugent became the first. He said, if you want to put a criminal uniform on me, you're going to have to nail it to my back. And hundreds of others would follow, as has been mentioned. The American dimension begins about 2.5, 3 years later. Two men from the Foreign Affairs Department of the Republican movement came to the Irish Northern Aid, came to Mike Flannery in New York, and they had a message. They had a message from Brendan Hughes, who was the, sorry, I was told not to take this out. They had a message from Brendan Hughes, who was the officer commanding of the H Block prisoners at that time. And the message was a simple one. You've already heard what the British did when those prisoners wouldn't wear a criminal uniform. How dare these Irish prisoners defy a British policy like that? How dare they defy the orders that came from London? How dare they say that they're not criminals and they won't wear a criminal uniform? Started slowly, some beatings, they lost privileges, they tried to humiliate the prisoners by not letting them wear their clothes. It would escalate with beatings. By the end of about 2.5 years, it had gotten to the point where that message came to the United States, and the message was from Brendan Hughes. And he said, we are very near a hunger strike in the prison. Our youngest prisoners especially are being beaten. We cannot accept the conditions and live under these conditions any longer. We don't want a hunger strike. What we're hoping is that in America, the British are concerned about American public opinion. They are concerned with what happens there. If you can organize, if you can highlight the plight of the prisoners, if you can get political support for them, that may be enough. That with the initiatives that were going on with Cardinal O'P and others, that might be enough for the British to see sense, for the British to see some justice, for the British to recognize these political prisoners and political prisoners. Simply allow them the same conditions that prisoners have had in other parts of Blanquette. And slowly, this was at that time was regarded as a very formidable job to do. Because remember, at that time, news media was a lot different. There was no internet. News media here, the television, the radio, the newspapers, almost exclusively relied on British information news services. I mean, they could kill 10 people in Ballymurphy, they could massacre them. And they could just say these people were all firing at them and they deserved to die, and it would take until just a couple of years ago as an inquest for the truth to come out. The British had that control. No one from Sinn Féin or the Republican movement was allowed at that time because of visa denial. Had that policy going for them. They had that control of the news media. Most of our politicians would accept that they set up, other than a handful led by Mario Biaggi, the ad hoc congressional. Slowly, we started to set up a network. I was sent back to work for the press center for 3 weeks to train. Or we started to organize committees around the country. Started to get the word out that this is crucial, that this could be a hunger strike, that lives could be lost, that they were depending on us. They were depending on Irish America not to let them down. And one of the first areas, I'll tell you, I'm not surprised at the great work done by Jim McGettrick and others today, because there has always been a great tradition in Rhode Island. I know one of the first areas that came forward were people like Pete Harris, people like Professor McAloon, people like George Doyle, people like Jim and Mavis McGettrick, Father McNulty, and others who came out and responded immediately. And it would begin slowly. We'd use the Irish people to get the word out, to get publicity out about what was happening in the H-Box. We would use those people to try and go to other organizations, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, the other organizations that were involved in the Irish community, to try and make them aware of what was really happening, about how important this was, about the suffering being inflicted on these Irish prisoners, about the danger of a hunger strike coming up, about what the British were doing, this injustice on top of all the other injustices which they did and used to stay in the north of Ireland. When Kieran Nugent and Ron McCann Joe McGuire, and Seamus Delaney and others were released, one of the first places they were sent was right out to the United States because we were regarded as so crucial. Kieran Nugent and the others traveled through here. Seamus Delaney and others traveled through here to speak to people like you. And at that time, they were all illegal. And the British actually put pressure on our government to arrest them, to stop these tours. One of the classic examples, Ron McCann was actually invited to the Boston State House by an Assemblywoman, Marie Howe, to get a proclamation. And he had to run out the back door. They had to, as the immigration agents were coming in the front to try and chase him and arrest him in front of the whole of the assembly. Kieran Nugent was arrested, and it made national news. We were able to get him a number of interviews first. He was arrested, then he got national news. The fact that this man had to come here, couldn't speak out legally, that the prisoners in Sinn Féin and Republicans in Ireland could not speak to the American people and put their case forward to some free and open debate. That made news. Finally, Ron McCann got arrested and went into a judge, an immigration judge, and the immigration said, Mr. McCann, sorry, you want me to start at the beginning? An immigration judge who knew Frank Durkin, the lawyer, said, if you claim political asylum, we'll give you bail. He can go out and appear publicly. So for the first time, we were able to put speakers out publicly, ex-blanket men. And the effect was dramatic, because here are the British saying these people are all vicious criminals. Here are the British saying these people are all unfeeling criminals. They deserve no justice. They deserve no human rights. They should be treated as Britain wants them to be treated. And you see Ron McCann and Kieran Nugent, you couldn't help but laugh at them. Kieran Nugent, the big fear I had whenever I got him to do an interview was that he wouldn't curse during it, you know, like on national television. You'd see that, and it put a lie to everything that the British had been saying. And it built up, and slowly, by the end of the first hunger strike that was been talked about, there was an event down by the United Nations. I was told to stay in the office, that there'd be word coming out. It was a major event in Ireland. Had somebody else bring him down, and when he came back, he said at Times Square, you know, those lights that go around the center of the world, *1 story worldwide, hunger strikers near death. And Frank came back and said, Martin, we're now at the point. Newsmen were telling him, Ireland is now an American issue. You've made it an American issue. And it was made an American issue, reading Irish Northern Aid. And it become that. Because of the people who went down to a place in Rhode Island, you didn't have a British consulate. So you had to make Robert Emmet Square the British consulate. And when you didn't have a demonstration at Robert Emmet Square, then you went to Boston so you could get a real crowd, show some real patriots in Boston at the British consulate there at demonstrations. And when you weren't in Boston and when you weren't at Robert Emmet Square, they would go to Hartford, Connecticut, or Glastonbury, really, and demonstrate there. And because of that, you go to the Providence Journal. You go to papers up here like the Hartford Courant and others. You go across the New England. And because of that, because it was a national story in Ireland, because of all the events that were happening in New York and elsewhere around the country, because of the work that you did, by the end of the first hunger strike, we thought that Thatcher would see some sense. We thought she'd see some justice. I know we were wrong. We thought she'd say to herself, this isn't working. We tried to isolate these prisoners. We tried to make them criminals. And all we see is greater support than ever before, all around the United States, in addition to the same thing happening across Ireland. We see where we never saw anything in places like Rhode Island. Now there's a demonstration there every night, and if they're not there every night, they're over in Boston or Hartford or somewhere else. And it made the news, and it should have shown her that the time that their policy, what they started out was going to undercut the prisoners, make them seem criminals. They should have seen it was lost. And instead, Margaret Thatcher said, now I've got them. Now we broke the first hunger strike. Now we'll break another hunger strike, and this time they'll have to knuckle under. This time, we will win out. The Iron Maiden can't fail and can't be beaten, right? And you know what happened. And because of the influence, the impact that those first people like Kieran Nugent and Fra McCann, the inspiration of the hunger strikers, as Bobby Sands was near death, demonstrations across the country. I know in New York it became thousands of people every day in front of the British consulate. One of the calls I remember, I'll never forget, Pete Harris called, and he said, "Martin, we think that if Bobby Sands died, and I pray it doesn't happen, we think the governor in Rhode Island will lower all the flags on every state building and show that the state of Rhode Island is in mourning for this great patriot." And one of the things I had to do, I had to make a report every day and send a telex back to Ireland so they could see what was happening. And I said to myself, "That's great, Pete." Oh, I said to Pete, "That's great, Pete, I'm counting on you." And I said to myself, the state of Rhode Island, no state lower all the flags at half-mast and be in mourning for someone, that's just too much. I'm not going to expect that. Pete's a great guy. Rhode Island's doing a tremendous job. I'm not going to count on anything like that or say that's going to happen. When Bobby Sands died, two biggest things across the United States were that 10,000 people closed the streets of New York for blocks around the British consulate, number one. And number two, Rhode Island was announcing that the flags would be flown at half-mast in mourning for this great patriot. And there's the hunger strikers side. Just want to acknowledge, it was mentioned before, Sean Sands. Malachi McCreesh is here. Could you stand up, raise your hand? We didn't realize it at the time, but Sean Sands, Elizabeth O'Hara, and Malachi McCreesh came out to the United States to tour around and speak to Irish Americans, to do interviews, to support the hunger strikers. And I mean, think of what they were asked to do. Their brothers had just died. Their family was in mourning. They were grieving, and instead of staying with their families, instead of just staying and trying to deal with their own grief at home, they came to us, they came to the United States, and began to speak because they wanted to fight so that other families didn't lose their lives, didn't have to suffer a loss the way their family did. And they deserve tremendous respect for doing that and for the job they did. And just one example before I finish up. You saw the coronation a couple of weeks ago?
No.
You heard about it. Somebody saw it. That was some big event, right? Prince Charles, King Charles, he's a big important guy, right? His first time coming to the United States was in New York, the Lincoln Center, in June of 1981. And Malachi McCreesh, did I say McAllister before? No. Malachi McAllister's a good friend of mine, I'm sorry. Malachi McCreesh came out, I'm sorry, and see what happens when you get old, you lose names. Malachi McCreesh, Elizabeth O'Hara, and Sean Sands were there. And what we did is we sent him a telegram, Prince Charles at Lincoln Center, and he was going to be there with Ronald Reagan's wife and Nancy, and they were going to be there, and they were going to show everybody how the English are so well-mannered, and it's like PBS and Masterpiece Theater, and they could never be guilty of anything, right? Like torturing people in Long Kesh and forcing hunger strikers to die, right? That's what they were going to do. And we sent in a telegram, and we asked for a meeting. And of course they refused. And so we said, are you going to stand with the families of the hunger strikers when Prince Charles is at Lincoln Center? 20,000 people came down. Prince Charles, they were banging banglets. They filled the streets in front of Lincoln Center. Prince Charles I remember introducing the rally and just pointing out Prince Charles was being snuck in the back door at Lincoln Center. Couldn't show his face. The next day, because of that, he actually went to the mayor of New York, Mayor Koch, and said he did not like being the target of so much invective, right? And the mayor, who was could see the crowds were in front of the British consulate or around Lincoln Center and everywhere and around the country, simply said, well, then you should get out of Ireland. And the British papers didn't like that. They said you're not supposed to report what the prince said. So anyway, he just said, well, what do you expect me to change my manners because Bonnie Prince Charlie's here? That's how the next station is. But the following day, his aunt, Princess Margaret, said she was supposed to come to America to follow up. And she said she's not coming, not going to face the reaction in America. That's what America had accomplished, Irish America had accomplished. That's what people in Rhode Island and elsewhere around the country had accomplished. And I do want to, just when I'm looking right at them, I know a lot of people come to me sometimes and say, Martin, we know you're in the office. You know, you went down there in New York and you did a lot of statements. But the guy that we saw in Rhode Island, the guy that came across to us, who was all over New England, if we were in Boston, if we were in Hartford, if we were anywhere in New England, the guy we saw leading the way for Irish Northern Aid, given that leadership, was Richie Lawler. And I agree with them 100%. Rich. So just think of it. The British had a policy. They were going to criminalize the Republican prisoners, right? They were going to criminalize the struggle. They were going to end their support. They ended up building support all across the United States. They ended up in a support where their leaders, their royal figures, their royal family, their prince and future king was ashamed to show his face in New York City or anywhere in the United States because of they were seen as the true criminals for what was being done in Long Cash. That's how much they were defeated. That's how much the hunger strikers had won. We know. And we know it went on. We know it would be 10 hunger strikers would die before it would end. But there's no question about who won the hunger strike. There's no question about who won the victory. It was those men locked away, gave their lives, and who created all of that support across the country. And the inspiration they gave us didn't end there. On the platform, with Malachi McCreesh and Elizabeth O'Hara and Sean Sands, opposite Prince Charles was a man named John Deary. He's the first person who said, let's support a special envoy and let's start arranging American presidential forums. So that 1992 came and Bill Clinton was running for president. He had to address, not only him, but anyone in the Democratic Party had to address a visa for Jerry Adams and appointing a special envoy. So when you talk about the hunger strike and its impact, when you talk about celebrating the Good Friday Agreement, remember that the first major steps, the visa for Jerry Adams, the call for a special envoy, all of that came about because of the inspiration of the hunger strikers, seeing that Ireland was something that Americans, Irish Americans, cared about. And if they'd march every day, they'd vote about it. Okay, so three things that I just want to finish up with very quickly. Three really quick things. Number one, as long as you live, always remember, every time you come to that monument, always remember, always be proud, and never lose a chance to tell the story about how 10 Irish Republican prisoners locked away in Long Cash could beat every strategy, everything that the British and Margaret Thatcher could throw at them and make it so that their future king had to be stuck in the back door, couldn't visit the United States, couldn't come to the United States again with their special relationship. That's how much of a victory the hunger strikers won. Always remember it, never let it be forgotten, number one. Number two, always remember, always be proud about the American dimension to their victory. How? When they came to the United States, when they sent a message, when they said we're counting on, when they said Britain is paying attention to what you do, don't let us down. That Irish America generally across the country, and in Rhode Island, I won't say more than anywhere else, but as much as anywhere else, they were there, you're in the forefront. Responded. You were the ones who made the flags come to half-mast when Bobby Sands died, something the British will never forget, certainly, and we should never forget it, number 2. And number 3, it's something that Malachi McCreesh said to me. He was there with Elizabeth O'Hara and Sean Sands. I'll never forget it. He said, just always remember, Martin, our brothers did not die for 5 demands for better clothes, better conditions inside a British prison. They died for the freedom of their country. Today, of course, we have the Good Friday Agreement. We have a pathway that can lead to what the hunger strikers died for what was proclaimed in 1916. I still think the British are going to try to find some way, somewhere, some think tank is going to have some kind of plan. They think that they're going to use that to never give a referendum. They think maybe Ireland will become prosperous and people forget about it, we can keep putting it off, and maybe it'll never happen. And what I'm asking you to do, always remember what the hunger strikers died for. Always remember what so many Irish patriots have died for. Always remember what that 1916 memorial stands for. We have to play our part, as we did during the hunger strike, as we did so many other times in Irish history. Irish America has to play a key role. We have to put pressure on the British to give the referendum, to allow that referendum to go forward, and to make sure that we do everything we can to see that it ends the way it always should have, the way it should in justice, the way those leaders in 1916 died for, the way the hunger strikers died for, the way that Irish America has always stood for, and that is freedom for all Ireland.